So this part of ourselves that we feel that we're sometimes in contact with, and sometimes maybe more in our head or more in the personal aspect of self. It's always there. It's always here. It's always immediately accessible. It's always integrated, and it's always disintegrating. It doesn't even have a preference. It doesn't have a preference over masculine and feminine. It doesn't have a preference over contracted or expanded. It doesn't have a preference over meing or being. Preference is just simply not in its movement, in its vocabulary. So there's a part of us that is really radically okay with everything, even when the sort of personal aspect feels like things aren't okay, or they aren't going right, or we're not awake enough, or we're not clear enough, or we're not interconnected enough. We feel like something has been lost, or we're not as clear as we typically are or have been in the past, or all this has these like preference tones to it. So the self, the personal aspect, let's say, which isn't something you necessarily need to get rid of. It's more just something to investigate in a very deep and profound way. And then the truth takes care of itself. This is all about preferences. It's all about what I want, what I don't want, what I prefer, what I don't prefer. And those assumptions of preference are so built into the fabric of how we feel as a person. They're so built into the fabric of how we formulate a view almost instantaneously of any situation, any experience, that it's very challenging to get behind. With the intellect, it'll never happen. The mind can't get behind this because the mind is about division. The mind is about dividing up reality, and it's already moving from the place of an assumption of preference, always. And that's fine. It's a tool. The mind is a tool. The thought process is a tool, and it's a powerful tool. But it can't get underneath that fundamental sense of I'm apart from, and thus, one way or another, I need to manage that which I'm apart from. I need to decide what's more important, what's less important, what's better for me, what's worse for me. So practice ultimately always at some point will come to this place where you feel first intellectually and then energetically or instinctually, you feel that you've gone as far as you can. You've literally like exhausted all resources, all avenues, all inquiries, all exertions through meditation, through, if it's Zen, it might be painful meditation, but you've exerted yourself really as far as you feel you can in a certain way. And you just come to this sort of end of personal will. And that is it's actually a very terrifying and threatening place to find yourself. It can be. Because this is where we come face to face with true helplessness. This is where we come face to face with true mystery, a physical mystery, a knowing that there's something absolutely and completely unknowable, and our nose is touching it. We're right at the sort of edge of that. As the individual, we're at the edge of the end of everything we've known about ourselves as an individual, in a sense. And every sincere practitioner, every person I know that I've worked with or been close with, who have been investigating their deeper nature, their true nature, comes to this place at some point. And it doesn't have to be an exact moment in time that you can identify, but it often is. It's more of a movement in life. It's sort of a phase on the wave of your life, and it just becomes obvious. So when we come to this place, we come to this point, the conversation gets very interesting with people because they start to communicate in a very different way, and it has an energetic feel to it, to me, that is very it's encouraging from the standpoint of realization. It's where the rubber starts to meet the road, and the communication is something like, it varies, but it's often something like, I feel a lot of frustration, pain, dissolution, I feel completely lost, I feel confused and disoriented. And yet the voice will shift, maybe imperceptibly to that person, but to me it's day and night. The voice will suddenly shift, and it's this knowing that this is exactly how it has to be, and this is completely okay. Even the okayness doesn't have to come in, because it's just how it is. This is how things are, and it could be no other way. And what I notice is people start talking that way. They start communicating from sort of two places at once. And when I started this conversation, I mentioned the dichotomy between the sense of personal self and the sense of radically impersonal whatever that you could never call a self. You could never call it anything, actually. You could, but you miss it. So when somebody comes to this place of surrender, being surrendered, it's not a choice. You don't choose to be surrendered. You become surrendered by life. They come to this place, they start to communicate, and it's not just in words, it's the movement of what's happening with them starts to communicate this voice from two different worlds. And I've been in this situation with people so many times that it's quite familiar, and it's actually almost like clockwork to me. It's, there's something very magical about it. There's something very, very mysterious. It's painful, but it's also okay in a way that we don't really even remember, except for maybe early childhood, this okayness of just this. And that's quite paradoxical. And I think when you're moving from the point of view of the individual into this place, you almost overlook that other side of things. It's moving through you. It's starting to express through you clearly. But I think that you're still sort of tied into the intellect and the one that's monitoring and paying attention to how am I doing, how are things going in my spiritual process, how are things going internally, what's going on with my emotions, how's my inquiry going. Like that stuff still occupies the mind a lot. So the identity is still sort of tied into that part of us, that part of things. And so often the individual kind of overlooks this other side. But what's funny is, to me, it's like shouting in my face. It's saying nothing. Its signature is emptiness, but it's very powerful, very powerful. It's far more powerful than anything that feels like content, than anything that feels like your choices, your life, your story. So, so when somebody comes to this place, the conversation, again, is very interesting. It's very dynamic. It's instinctual, and it's momentary. I don't have a formula for how to help somebody take that step off of the edge of everything. But I don't need a formula, because they do it somehow. That's what, that moment is what has brought them this far. The instinct that's possible, that can happen, that it does happen, and it does happen, and it's happening more and more. So you get to this place where it's like, and I know there's no specific teaching. I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you, well, meditate this much or use this exact inquiry, although I might suggest a certain practice based on the immediate conversation. The teaching or the transmission or the communication, which doesn't come from one person to another person, it's not like that. It's more like a local effect in the energy field. It's really very, very momentary. It's very instinctual and right now. And I had a Zen teacher years ago, and he made an analogy. It's like a baby chicken coming out of the egg. It's pecking from the inside, and the teacher's pecking from the outside. And it's sort of like that. Of course, when the chicken comes out of the egg, there's no egg, no chicken, no teacher, no student. But that's how it appears from the individual standpoint. So then, yeah, we come to this place where the student knows, the practitioner, and pardon those terms, but just it gives me a way to talk about this. They know that simultaneously, there's absolutely nothing I can do right now. There's nothing I can do to make this happen. They're starting to really see through control. They're seeing through the illusion of control. And so simultaneously, there's that knowing, literal knowing that I can't do anything here. Doesn't mean they stop meditating or stop inquiring or anything like that, but they know that all of my tricks, all of my spiritual seeking, all of that isn't really amounting to anything here. There's something so much bigger, so much subtler here that's moving, that I know at every level I can't do anything. And then simultaneously, there's this knowing that everything in me and everything outside of me is moving this forward. Everything in me and everything outside of me, the unnameable place that doesn't know place, that is actually propelling this forward. So at the same time you feel completely surrendered, there's something that you can never find and never put your finger on, that's not you and it's not other, that is moving this forward. And it feels like it's a very powerful impulse, but its power is in its subtlety. It's sublime is what it is. And you could almost say that this is sort of a transition point of will, where the personal will dissolves into something like a universal will. But I hesitate to talk about universal will and that sort of thing, because that can easily be made into a concept, and this isn't conceptual. But there is an urge for truth to know itself, living truth to know itself. There's an urge for emptiness to know itself. There's an urge for the undivided, unmanifest to just be what it is. And that starts to carry you forward. It's almost as if you pass the baton. You get to but you have to come to the end of what you know you can do. You can't cheat this system. You can't say, well, I've tried everything. Because some people will say that, oh, I've tried everything. I've tried all the tricks. I've tried everything. What do I do next? But that's not this place I'm talking about. That's still negotiation. We're trying to negotiate with reality, our concept of reality. You actually have to come to this place of spiritual exhaustion almost, to really seeing in a visceral way that you can't go one step farther. And then something else comes in, a voice that is, it can feel like unconditional love. It can feel vast. It can feel, how you'll interpret it doesn't really matter, but it does, this does occur this way. It moves this way. And this is sort of the veil, the last veil you cross, on the other side of which is what I would call awakening. The reason I kind of went down this road and talked about the subject is because there's so many people right now I'm communicating with that are like right there or have crossed over it. And I'm not trying to give you any specific understanding that you can remember or reproduce in your mind. I'm actually directly pointing to this because it's a very real phenomenon, and it's even primary to phenomenon, but it's very real, and I love it. Hey, Dan. So we come to this place, this place of no place. In one sense, it feels like the end of your life. There's a part of you that says, if I go one more step, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive. If I go one more step, I'm not even sure. I'm not sure what's going to be left on the other side. It will feel like all of your defense mechanisms are being triggered, and that's completely natural. That's how this goes. It doesn't have to feel like that, so don't look for that. But it's very common, and just know that that's okay. If you experience that, if you experience your body literally responding like it's being triggered or threatened in that moment, and there's nothing there, there's nothing to trigger it, there's nothing to threaten, and you know that, just know it's okay. It's okay to whatever, take that next step or let that next step be taken by something that's not you. So that was really the thrust of this initial message, is this transition point. And the funny thing is, this transition point, the thought process will make this into there's a big path, and then the path goes this way and that way, and then there's this transition point later on in the future. But what I'm talking about isn't in the future. It's not. It's actually right here. It's right here all the time. And so when the initial awakening occurs, it's, that sounds like an event. It sounds like something that happens to you, but to the person it happened to, it's laughable to call it anything. It's laughable to call it an awakening. It's also laughable to think that there's someone that happened to, because the point of the awakening is the whole paradigm of a self apart from reality collapses. Maybe not completely, but in that moment, it feels like it's gone. And for a period of time afterwards, it really does feel very, very, it really feels like it's not there. The whole sense of self apart. So, initially, it will be somewhat perceived and remembered as an event, because that's the way our minds operate. They categorize, they catalog things, they put them into contexts in comparison to other events in our life. So it will sound and feel, in a sense, like an event that happened, even though your instincts know not to ruminate on that or think about it as such or whatever. It typically gets formulated that way to some degree. But as that insight, the actual insight of what awakening is, as that matures, and this can take a few months, it can take a few years, it can take longer. But as that matures, what's seen, what's ultimately realized, is that place between the personal and the radically impersonal, that place between absolute surrender because there's nothing else that's possible, there's only dissolution, and the intimacy of the sense of here now, that seeming paradoxical point, that is realization. That's what realization is. That's how this is. That's how reality functions. Reality, there's a Zen master named Banki who used to say over and over, everything is perfectly managed in the unborn. And to me, this is what he's pointing to. This isn't something that happens and then something comes through the other side. This is something that happens, seemingly, and that taste that seems like something that happened to the person to make that person become a universal person, pure being, pure consciousness, the sense of I am, that momentary point of dissolution is actually the fabric of everything. And the place where it contacts vivid textures of life, of the physical experience of life, is also everywhere. That contact point is literally everywhere. It's in every sound. It's in every color and shape before the eyes. It's in the sensations in the body, every sensation, any one sensation. You find all of this. You find everything I'm pointing to in the sensation. So this aliveness, that you could call it aliveness, this reveling in its own nature, is literally tingling throughout all of experience. You could say the body, the environment, the sounds, the colors and shapes, and even the movement of consciousness, which previously was perceived as a lot of thoughts. And then it's realized and recognized experientially that there's actually no boundary between those seeming entities, meaning the body, the sounds. So there's no boundary between the phenomenon. The phenomenon are literally interpenetrated experientially. You can't find otherwise. You can't find evidence to the contrary without a thought. And so things become sort of an immediate, always present sense cloud. And the always present is not the kind of presence that you extrapolate from the past and future. And then you say, I'm not in the past, I'm not in the future, so I'm in the present. That's okay, that's a good practice, but that's more of a mental, that's the mind's version of what I'm talking about. The always here that I'm really speaking about is what I would call eternal. And the eternal means outside of space and time. Really, it means outside of time. It doesn't mean immortal. It doesn't mean a long time. It doesn't mean one point in time. It means outside of the experience of time completely. And that may sound sci-fi or otherworldly or very like a mystical state, but it's actually not. It's when it's obvious, it's very, very obvious. And it's also like, oh my God, I've always known this. I've always experienced this, but somehow I learned to overlook this experience. I've learned to overlook what the eternal actually is. And you sort of, I don't know if you give yourself permission or the realization itself just matures to this level where you suddenly allow part of yourself or all of yourself to just see the importance of that, to just see the importance of that direct experience of eternity, of, you know, clearly there's no way there could be a future, there's no way there could be a past, because I always have to go to mind references to find those things, those entities. So now it's just here, it's just this, and even this isn't a here. There's no label that says this is here, so there's just this. So it sort of drops attention right into the eternal. And when we start to give ourselves one way or another permission, or we've just exhausted all trying to get out of suffering in every other way, which every other way is all of the mind, and realize that trying to get out of that suffering just causes more suffering in the mind. It's just more seeking. Once we really realize that, sometimes that just drops us right into this eternal, this pure sense. And when I talk about this, I really want to emphasize that everyone I'm talking to knows this, but they're not going to label it like I do. Okay, so understand, I'm not talking about something you don't know yet. I'm not. It's already in your experience, I promise you. But you may perceive it slightly different. Okay, you may have a different label for it. Some people might call it like a vibration. I've heard one person say it's waves. Someone who I know knows it. So I can tell energetically they're very clear on this. She just says it's waves. Everything is waves. And that's very much like it is. It's a mystery that keeps falling into itself. It's a seeking, not a seeking, it's an inquiry or an investigation that's become nothing but pure fascination. It's not trying to find anything anymore. The very core of inquiry is just a fascination with, it's almost as if you're saying, wow, what is this? But there's no one saying that. You don't need to say it. There's no words to it. It's just self. It's almost like self-fascination, but not self, the person. The self-fascination is the sound is hearing itself. The sound is literally hearing itself. It's alive. It's a life form, you could say. It self-propagates, and it also self-dissolves. The sensations in the body, they're just there. They don't need your help. They don't need you to understand them, think them into being, label them. They're just there, right now. Whether it's in the hands, the tingles in the fingers, in the face, pressure in the face, behind the eyes, just that. All labels gone, all mental images of the body map gone. There's just that sensation. That's it. It might feel like tingles. It might feel like whatever. But the point is, the tendency to describe it, even to yourself, is strong. So recognize that. Don't fight it, but recognize that I can touch into that sensation or that sound like you're describing, but pretty quickly I start thinking about it. I start making it into a map or an image or a process or oh, great, this is a meditation I can do later, all that. That's fine. That's all thought though. The actual experience, the pure experience, it's just there for you. It's not even for you. It's just there. There's no, you can't make it not be there, right? It's very, it's really jester-like, to be honest. It's very whimsical and innocent. But again, I'm using descriptors to try to just tune in your attention to that which I already know is in your direct experience, because all of what we perceive as reality is made out of this stuff. It's made out of this, and it's always here with us. It's just that we, at some point in our past, our distant past as a child, we said, whoa, this is way too intense. I can't, whoa, whoa, whoa. And we backed up a little bit. We just backed up, which is fine, a little bit of resistance. The problem is we have a very, very complex mind. And when we backed up, we started to create a sense of self. And this probably happened 100,000 years ago, but we created a complex enough frontal lobe where we could go internal and stay there. And the easiest way to stay internal is believe you're not there. To believe that the world I perceive as my past and my future, that's very real. And we've really swallowed our own pill with this. So, so this direct, immediate, scintillating flow, this sense cloud, which doesn't need a label, it doesn't need a boundary, because it doesn't have any of those by nature. It's not boundaried. It's always here. And that's it. That's the teaching, that's the practice, that's realization. That you don't need anything but what you have. You don't need anything but what's in your immediate experience ever. No matter how enlightened someone sounds, or the writing, how good it is, or any of that, that's all fine. Let it have an immediate effect if it can tune you in. But you are carrying around a gold mine. You're carrying around the catalyst for your most profound realization. And there are some amazing sort of places this goes, but it really doesn't matter to talk about that. The point is, 99% of what you need, you carry with you. It's the sound of this voice without any content. It's the sensation in your feet right now. It doesn't seem like it. I know sometimes it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but how do I get whatever, my partner to love me? How do I find validation? How do I finally get success at work? How do I finally get security, safety, appreciation, love, all that, right? That's what we do. We go, oh, that's fine. Yeah, I can feel it. I can feel what you're talking about. But okay, now how do I, whatever, right? So all of this sort of spiritual stuff, this awakening stuff is, it's not complicated, and it's not about finding the perfect teacher, and it's not about finding the right technique, and it's not about working really, really, really hard. Although all those things can be helpful, sure. It's ultimately not about that. It's about really honoring what is being given to you moment to moment in the physical experience, in the sensations, in the sounds, okay? In the movement of consciousness, in the movement of thought. If a thought says, okay, this sounds cool, but then later I won't be able to do it because then I'll get distracted, and right, and you go, oh, that's a thought, movement of thought. We follow it, we watch. What is it? What's this experience leading into that thought? Directly, what is that thought made out of? What does it arise out of? What does it move inside of? And then what does it dissolve back into, right? What is that movement of that thought? What does it feel like? In the same way a sensation feels like a sensation. In the same way the tingling in the fingers feels like it feels, just like it is. No, it doesn't need labels, doesn't need descriptors. Consciousness has an experiential aspect to it in the same exact way. The tingling of consciousness, the flow. To me, I usually make analogies like water, because it seems to flow like water. It can get into like little eddies and curves of thought. It can be very intense sometimes, very pressured, almost like attention really wants to move into thought, and that's fine. It can almost create, I think it does create what is like a standing wave. You know what a standing wave is? It's a standing wave, and consciousness is reflective in nature. So the reflection is reflecting itself, and that's what self-consciousness feels like. It feels like, oh, I'm here and everything else is out there. There's my world, there's my problems, my solution, my lover, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my whatever, future, past, all that. But that's a standing wave. You're taking yourself to be one part of the wave, and your life, the outside world, your thoughts, your feelings, that's the other part of the wave. That reflective nature of consciousness reflecting on itself, that's what you could say keeps us sort of imprisoned into the mind. That's what makes us identify with thoughts. Okay, so consciousness has this reflective nature. And recognizing that also helps, right? And so attention into thought can be very helpful with this. You can just consider thought another sense, just like sound, right? If you listen to a sound or the ambient sounds in the room, you might hear a buzzing, a humming, I don't know what's in your room. And if you really just relax into that, you let that sound wash over you and wash through you, you start to hear ringing in your ears. That ringing is because your frontal lobe usually filters out a lot of sense experience and says that's not important. But when we make it important, when we put our attention in the sense experience, we're giving back 100% of it. That's that sound of buzzing. So very commonly, when right after someone has an awakening, they're like, "Oh my God, everything's buzzing." You know, what's that buzzing sound? Or sometimes during a retreat, we've been meditating for days, and I give a guided meditation, someone will say, "Wow, did you hear that buzz afterwards?" You know, and that's it. But that buzz that's actually always there. It's physiologic. That's the background noise that your the neural receptors make. So when you start to hear that, experience that cloud of sound, you know what I'm talking about. That's what I mean by just sound. Sound hears. There's no one doing that. It's just doing itself. It doesn't need your help. Okay? Consciousness is the same way. Although when we're really bound into thoughts, it doesn't feel like it. When you start to turn attention back into consciousness and investigate it directly as a sensation, it's sort of the same way. You can sort of dilate your attention out in consciousness in the same way you did with sound. There are many ways to facilitate this, and a lot of techniques are based on this, because this is sort of the first barrier to get a taste beyond the sense of individuality inside of consciousness into pure consciousness. That's a big step. That's energetically and experientially. That's where you go, whoa, there's something here that's beyond my normal day-to-day experience of life, is clearly, right? And that's when we taste that pure consciousness, pure being. And for some, it's so profound, it's so compelling that even after awakening, they can kind of get stuck with that. So there's this whole stage after awakening of ways to integrate it, properly. But it does. It feels like pure being. It feels like everything is made out of consciousness. Okay, because everything that you took to be real is made out of consciousness. All of life that you perceived, the sense of me, life out there, you, all of the images and contexts, the contexts and interpretations we put over everything, all of that is made out of consciousness. And that first step is to go, boom, whoa, everything is consciousness. And you don't have to think that. You don't care suddenly about thinking so much. Thoughts can come and go, but they're just fluctuations in this huge ocean of consciousness, right? Once we've had that taste, we can investigate consciousness in the way I'm speaking. We can investigate it very directly, like a sensation. And if I could tell you there's one sort of practice that's going to pay the biggest dividends, it's this, is to really recognize when polarities start to become set up in consciousness. When I feel like I'm in a story in consciousness, I'm in a story, and reminding yourself that's a thought. Oh, but that person did this to me, and that's another thought right here, right? That's it, a thought. It's moving, it's fluctuating consciousness. So what's the consciousness? Like, what is? And then it's like, it's bigger, it's suddenly the lens is dilated out. That kind of work is very powerful. It's very important, because I see people even with reasonably profound states of realization that are still getting stuck in those polar states of consciousness. They're still intellectualizing somewhat, and so it's the roots of that are deep, let's say. But once you get a taste of what I'm talking about with this, when you can recognize the movement of consciousness as the sound, right? In the same way sound becomes ambient background noise, and then it becomes a distinct sound, a voice, or the buzzer over there. It can kind of not contract, but it can consolidate into a distinct sound, and then it can dilate out into just the cloud of sound. Consciousness does the same thing, but when it contracts, it feels like a thought. And early on, before we really start to get some insight, some experiential insight, that contraction feels very much like me, my life, my problems, my past and my future, and my problems and solutions. That's what that contraction in consciousness feels like. It really has a binding effect when we have a lot of identity tied into consciousness still. So just recognize that that does happen, and it's perfectly okay. It's okay that it's like that. But just recognize that it's almost like the stakes are a little higher in consciousness, because when you introduce will, personal will into consciousness, when you're like, damn it, I'm sure I'm right about this. Like the more you feel like you're right about something, the more probably wrong you are, or at least the more you're not seeing something that's really trying to express at a deeper level, like an emotion, for instance. So that sense of will, frustration, and struggle inside of consciousness, recognize that a very little bit of misunderstanding of the nature of consciousness can lead to all that, which is good news, because a little bit of understanding into how that fixation, that polarity, that frustration in consciousness of a thought, right, can really get diffused by just going, oh, that's one single thought. That's just a thought. What does it feel like to be in that thought right now? What does that thought feel like if I fully accept the experience of it? Sounds like a sound. Sounds like a sensation. It's certainly not a problem. The analogy often used, which is good for specifically for what I'm talking about with consciousness and thoughts, is the wave and the ocean, right? That to me really points to the way consciousness and thought function. When the wave forms, if you identify as the wave, which we really do before awakening, that's just how it appears, that's how it feels to us. We identify as the wave, well, then you realize very quickly that your demise is at hand. As soon as you're forming, you're deforming. As soon as you're becoming strong and healthy and adult, you're already starting to dissolve. You already know this body mind is going to dissolve and die, right? That's how it feels to identify as the wave, the single thought, the belief that I need to defend, the self that I need to defend, the life that I need to defend. That's how it feels to be that wave. There's a lot of tension in that. But the moment you go, but that wave is really, it didn't come out of the ocean, it's part of the ocean. It's simply a movement of the ocean. It's a wave form, it's a fluctuation. And then we start to relax, dissolve into, okay, I'm also the ocean. I'm the wave, I'm the ocean. Or the wave is the ocean, and the ocean is the wave. Better not to just insert yourself in there, but just experience it that way. Recognize the thought is consciousness. No matter how compelling that thought is, it's still just consciousness. And consciousness is what thought moves inside of. It's what it fluctuates in. And that's perfectly fine. And when we can appreciate that sort of arrangement or relationship between thought and consciousness, we can start to apply it at different times. And sometimes when we're triggered, it's harder to kind of relax into that or recognize it. But at some point, even then, even when you feel like things that would normally trigger you, intense emotional experiences, when you're physically attracted to somebody, when you are angry, when someone's treating you wrong, when someone cheated you, whatever it is, those are the times you get really triggered. But even then, at some point, you'll find a freedom in recognizing, but even my response to that, the body might have a response, but that's just more of the sense cloud, right? But the response that feels like it needs to defend itself, that's that consciousness thought distortion. When you're experiencing as consciousness and thought simultaneously, that's not even a problem. So that's something else to investigate. The consciousness thought relationship, and the very direct empirical way to do it is when you're sitting, just watch for the next thought, or say, what belief am I operating from right now? And just sit there and wait. It'll come. What do I believe about this moment right now? And watch it. And when it comes, recognize that's a thought. The belief is always a thought. What interpretation is operating in the background right now about whatever, whether it's my practice, my life, my problems, my body, any of it. And the moment it comes to the surface, it's like, oh, what a gift to recognize that's also a thought. It's a movement. Meaning I don't need to get rid of it, right? When I recognize it's a thought, I don't have to go to war with it. I don't have to hold it at a distance and evaluate it, try to decide whether I like it or don't like it. None of that applies anymore. It's just a movement. It's a stirring in the oceanic field of consciousness, momentary stirring. So that's the direct way to approach this. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about before I turn off mute. Let's turn off the mute. Or actually, I'll keep them muted, but if you want to talk or ask a question, just unmute.
Angelo.
Hey.
Great. Yeah, appreciate the talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how, how subtle the thoughts can be.
Yes.
And when I started realizing, well, that thought's a part of it too, then all of a sudden it didn't really matter. And this was something I heard Odd just say. And it's interesting because I heard him say this before. It made sense to me, but I'd never had any experience of it. And then I had experience. I had knowledge of it, and I was kind of in the middle of experience, and then I've kind of been on the other side. And what he said was, whether your mind is busy or quiet, it's complete, from the perspective of truth, it's completely irrelevant. And it's kind of like, if there's no problem with what's in there, then okay, cool. All of a sudden there's no separation from any of it. And it's just like, it's all good. It's slicing. Oh, I was yesterday 5 minutes ago, I was there. Now I'm not. But even when you're not there, you're still there, which is the fun part. Cause then there's no trying to hold on to anything. And all of a sudden everything becomes equally valuable.
Yes.
And that sort of, to me, is the joy in it, when I, not that I always kind of am remembered that, but even the forgetting is part of it too. So there's no judging. When there's no judging of the forgetting, then the tendency is just to stay more in a the byproduct. I find the byproduct of that is just, okay, it's all good. Even when it's not good, it's still good.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So you're welcome. When you were speaking, I thought of one other thing to add that I think you touched on, but when we first start to investigate the nature of thought, whether we do or not, you don't even have to do that. Actually, that's not. People wake up all different ways. But if you're inclined to, or you take up an investigation the way we're talking about, where you look at one thought at a time, you watch whatever it is that feels like form a thought, become the thought, disform, and the I never goes away, or the sense of being never goes away. If you're able to sort of investigate that way and you're inclined to do it, great. But I just wanted to mention there's another approach that people talk about sometimes. It's called neti. Like, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this. And that's fine. When you start doing that with thoughts, it is half of the approach is to recognize I'm not that thought, meaning that's just a thought. It's not actually about me, right? So that's fine to do that. But if you're really inclined with a sort of masculine distortion, you can really distance yourself from thoughts, as if you're saying that's just a thought. I know it's not real, so I'm going to push it away, like push, and you can actually get into this place of like almost derealization. You can really distance yourself from thoughts, and that's fine. That can be a step in the right direction. But there's this whole other aspect, and when this other aspect comes in, that's when you realize what you just said. That's when you can feel completely comfortable whether there's a thought or not, because it actually doesn't matter. It's all made out of the same stuff. And that is what I would call the sort of the feminine aspect. The feminine aspect is Well, if you realize that that thought is not about you and not about anything specific, and it doesn't actually point to something outside of itself, it's just movement of consciousness. When you really realize that instinctually at the gut level, then all of a sudden you don't care. You don't care about the thoughts. You don't try to push them away. You actually sort of merge with the thoughts. And that's another sort of litmus test of somebody who's had an awakening, is they talk like that very commonly. They're just like so surprised that thoughts aren't a problem. They're just like, wow, I worry about them so much, and I don't care if there's thoughts or not. Like Kenny Johnson, a guy who does some videos online, who's really, really great. He put it this way after he had an awakening, or during his awakening, he said, I just sat there and let thoughts come by. Like I namaste every one of them all night long, and I was completely in bliss. You know, that's it. When you really realize first that the world you thought was your life and problems and all of that you've been struggling with, when you realize that was a thought, and then second, you realize, well, if that's a thought and all of this is thought, I don't need to fear the thought at all. At a gut level, you sort of just integrate with the thoughts. You realize you always were integrated with the thoughts, right? This is the sense of, some people experience it as pure I am, the sense of just I, right? And if you have experienced that, or you know that experience as you described very clearly, I often tell people, you know, a great practice is just to stay in that sense, just to sit with that sense. As Nisargadatta said, my teacher told me to stay with the sense of I am, and he said, and I listened to him, and in 3 years I was liberated. That's perfectly reasonable. It's a very, very good practice once you recognize, because that sense of I am will evolve in a way that's sort of hard and counterintuitive to talk about, but it absolutely does evolve. So once you recognize that, once you recognize the pure sense of consciousness, it may feel like pure being to you. It may feel like everything is being, or everything is consciousness. However you experience it, that's it. Your practice is that. You know, do that whenever you can. It's because it's a beautiful, wonderful practice. It's good for the body. It relaxes the body. It relaxes everything in your life. It'll take care of everything over time. That's that sense of pure consciousness. Now, I will say, and again, I always like to take the next step. The reason that works isn't because that's the ultimate reality, because it's not actually. The sense of I am is actually a bit in error. As Nisargadatta also said, if you regress properly, the I am sense will go away. And that does happen, and that's fine. It'll happen in its own time. And it's very paradoxical, but recognize that the reason this is such a great practice, once the sense of I am, or the sense of pure consciousness, has been recognized and realized. And yeah, it's not there 100% of the time, and it doesn't need to be. But once you know that, oh, I can attune right back to that. I can sit, close my eyes, and it's already there. Of course, it's here. It's the world of the sense of me. It's here, you know. Once you can attune to that, it's a great practice to stay with it. And here's why. That rectification of the feminine and masculine distortion that's required. Can someone turn off their mute? I'm hearing myself. Okay, so that rectification of the distortion of masculine and feminine that happens when we have an awakening, or when we realize this pure sense, this pure I, this pure being. That rectification, that balance between the true masculine and true feminine, which is disintegrative and integrative, that same balance, that same sweet spot is how we enter directly into phenomenon. Meaning we recognize now that sound, that one visual blur, that one movement of the body mind, that one physical movement, that itself is pure being. That is what that I am was. That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is the equanimity of just settling into pure consciousness. That equanimity is itself a reflection, because consciousness is a reflection, and it's a reflection of something I'm just going to call reality because it doesn't have a name. But what it is a reflection of is the most wonderful thing you'll ever encounter. It's the most powerful thing you'll ever encounter. It's also the most empty thing you'll ever encounter. It's also the most radically interconnected thing you'll ever encounter. And it's not a thing, but that's what consciousness is a reflection of. So if you can stand in that equanimity of pure consciousness, you're already attuning to the truth of reality. And the way you know that is the senses will start to come forward in that I am. You'll be sitting in that I am, and all of a sudden that bzzz, the buzz, you'll start to feel the stuff in the room vibrate with it, with that balance, that interplay of masculine and feminine, of integration and disintegration. That's what creates experience. Re-experience isn't possible without that. Without that radical intimacy of the feminine, without that complete dissolution of the masculine. And feminine and masculine are not two in the place I'm talking about, but that's the most fundamental way we can perceive them. That's what makes creation possible. Reality is literally creating itself right here and right now, out of nothing. That's the beauty of it. And as it creates, the most fundamental quanta of experience you can have is as one of those points of creation, which is a sound, a sensation, or a movement in consciousness. When that clicks, then is what I would call non-dual. Non-dual meaning no subject-object anymore. That means that the paradigm of perceiving a sense experience as over there, I'm the sensor, the sound is over there, and I'm perceiving it, that is kind of gone. Not kind of gone, it is gone, because that's not how reality is. It's just pure sense. So it's just sound. And there's a famous sutta in the Buddhist suttas, the Bahya Sutta, which describes this very clearly. Sound hears. Or when hearing only sound, I think is how it was literally said. But it's not a practice, that's the nature of sound. And that when that is clearly seen to be just how this is, that could be described as a phase of realization, but it's a distinct shift for people. And then that even evolves into the seeming space of consciousness itself, the vastness of what consciousness feels like, the fluidity and oceanic nature of consciousness itself is seen to be, and you may not intellectually know this, but it doesn't matter, it's seen to be, that's also an artificial construct. It's a mental construct. So then that sense of pure sense, that's like a sense cloud and interpenetrated, is also seen to be, and this gets really, really hard to talk about because there's just no words for this kind of thing, but it's seen to be also an extrapolation, and instead there's only one sound. That's it. One sound is the completion of the universe. One step of the foot is the completion of the universe. There's no outside to that. There's no other side. A sound doesn't exist on its own side. It doesn't have existence on its own side. The sound and you and consciousness and awareness and the universe and everything and nothing at all is that one sound. That's to experience one as everything. And this isn't, the weird thing about it is this isn't mystical in experience. It's very concrete, actually. It's very, very obvious. And there's nothing special about it. The specialness is kind of gone in a way. Because there's nothing that could make it special. There's nothing apart that could make, there's nothing to compare it to. Comparison is just gone, okay? This is, I won't go into stages and stuff, but some people would say this is true on a top. This is true, no self. And it's not a, oh my God, my self disappeared. It's not like that at all. It's just seeing so clearly into and through phenomenon and penetrating them so fully that it's clear that there was never anything like the movement that felt like something apart, that felt like an evaluator, that felt like something that could compare, because there's just this, whatever this is in that moment. And then it's not at all, nothing. So again, it gets very difficult to talk about, but that's kind of a progression that you can expect. Can't really expect it, but that's how it is, because that's how, as you penetrate the phenomenon themselves deeper and deeper, you become fascinated with sound. You become fascinated with movement, shapes, forms in front of your face, Like, it's funny because I'll be talking to people sometimes, even in like, sometimes in a work setting, and I can't hear anything they're saying. I mean, I can hear what they're saying, but I don't care what they're saying because I don't care about their information unless it matters. There's something that just knows when the information matters, it's assimilated, it's simple. But there's also something that knows I can feel what they're feeling, and then it dissolves more into that. It's just the experience of their visual experience of them, just those colors and shapes and the sounds, and they're all coalescing. And then that's even penetrated, and there's just nothingness. And I sometimes the thought will come, it's like, if I could describe to somebody what just happened, like that would be, it'd probably scare them. I mean, it'd be probably scary because there's nothing in that that the ego could want. And yet it's the most wonderful thing that could ever possibly happen. to dissolve into emptiness in the way I'm speaking, when whatever comes back from that is changed forever. And again, it's changed forever because it's seen that that empty nature is also everything, is everything. It's all the textures. And then it's the Heart Sutra is what talks about this. The Heart Sutra says this very clearly. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, and emptiness is no other than form. So there's no problem with radical immersion, integration, pain, sadness, personhood. The conventional experience of a person is perfectly fine. Perfectly, of course it is. How could there be a problem with anything? And it's also empty nature. And so living in that world, living in that place between where everything is dissolution by nature, and yet those textures are so fully experienced, so fully honored, that there's no holding back anymore from life. There couldn't be a holding back from life. That's the unconditional love aspect, where it's just going to find everything. It's going to find everything you hid from yourself, from other people. It sees everything. It feels everything. It feels every effect, and it wants to. It's just a fascination with life itself. Okay, questions?
I don't want to hog it if anyone wants to talk.
Hog it. Do it.
Yeah, it kind of, what you just reminded me of, and I've kind of heard Ajit talk about this too. It's like truth is going to want to see through everything. So if there is a sticking somewhere, if there is, a merge with, whatever, then it's going to keep coming back, and it's going to keep, at least my experience, going to keep grabbing my attention, until I see through it.
Mm-hmm.
And recognize, it's sort of like you were also saying too, there's that process where you have to, unmerge because you're so merged with it, but then you come back, there's like, oh, well, okay, yeah, I wasn't the anger, but you know what, I am the anger also. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's like, truth is just gonna, so whatever keeps coming back, that's the thing. But knowing, okay, I got to take a closer look at that because it keeps returning, and I keep returning. So there's a deeper investigation that's required, but not a deeper investigation from here,
right?
More of a deeper investigation from the heart, where it's more like what the curiosity, that contemplativeness, like what is that? Or mm-hmm. So yeah,
absolutely. That's very well said. It's just like that. You can't, when that coming back really starts happening, it's not a coming back of, oh, I'm a spiritual guy now and I know about emptiness, so this is easy on me. It's like, no, not how it works. The pain is full on, but it's also completely fine. And that's the interpenetration of masculine and feminine, and it just gets more and more intertwined until there's not even an ability to tell the difference between suffering and enlightenment anymore. There's a saying in one of the Oxfording pictures, I think it's the 9th, I neither linger in a state of enlightenment, nor am I where no enlightenment exists. That's how it is. It's not, there's no bypassing anymore at all. That is so antithetical to the experience of it to bypass anything. It's more like, let's go right into the center of this pain. It's horrible. The body hates it. I hate it as an individual or whatever, but I'm going to feel it 100% full on. Let's see what's here. and not try to stop it, not try to get rid of it, not try to metabolize it, not try to heal it, not try to make it anything other than what it is. Everything in the universe just wants to be what it is, 100%. So it's a matter of full honoring pain, sadness, dissolution, helplessness, fear, frustration, all of that. Those are perfectly allowed. I don't need to transcend them, get rid of them, move past them. They're right here in my heart all the time. Perfectly welcome to have all the attention they need. My pain, your pain, that doesn't even matter.
I had, when my mother died, it was 6 hours after she died, and we're at the cemetery, and we're driving down to where her plot was, and I just remember having this moment where I'd never felt worse in my entire life, but I felt so good that I felt that bad. Because there was I was fully experiencing it, and there was a beauty in that. As much as it sucked on some level, there was this unbelievable beauty. And even in the whole process of grieving her, which was really hard, there's aspects of I miss it because I was so present for it. And yeah, so I appreciate your.
That's beautiful. I love it. That's a perfect example. Very, very human experience, that without this, having kind of gone through this willingness to really disintegrate and to really let experience just permeate everything, to be able to be in that kind of an experience, is challenging to really be in it, to really fully be there. But that's what this work is. That's why this work is so valuable. It lets us fully inhabit our lives, our bodies, and that's largely what it's about. It's not the only thing it's about, but it's largely about that. It's beautiful. I think that's great.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi.
Hi.
I haven't met you before. I'm a friend of Marina's.
Oh, hi, Erin, right?
Yeah.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Gaia. Hi.
Gaia, nice to meet you.
Okay. So
take your time.
At the core of my question is my realization, frustration, which has that how do I say this? I'm really exhausted from overly identifying with my mind, and I'm really, really wanting to let go of my grip. And I also all my attempts to do practices to get myself there just become new ways of trying and doing. So there's a kind of hopelessness of I am stuck and I can't do it on my own. And I recognize that there's power in that. And I notice my mind is still trying to figure it out and wants to talk to you about wants to find where my I notice some of the places I'm stuck, it feels really important intuitionally for me to be deeply in my body.
Yeah.
And my background is in Vipassana meditation, which I've done a lot of. And I find that I have this experience also when inquiring into the energy, the consciousness of thought. It's the sensations are so intense that I kind of blow out, I become unwilling to stay present with them. And Marina pointed out recently that she was having that problem trying to stay in her body, and she realized it's because she was sort of trapping herself with her mind, and she wasn't able to. She just caused a lot of suffering for herself, which has happened to me. Like, I sort of wound myself up into extreme tension until she started to like get out of her mind. And she used this holiday practice by Salvador Poe that you might be familiar with, that I've been playing with. It's just sort of like noticing what's like widening your attention to be bigger than your mind, and feeling like what else is here, and what is known here, and what is alive here. And that's been helping me kind of realize how much I'm stuck in my mind, and my mind and emotions and sensations are fused. But it feels like I'm just sort of using it as another like thing to do, you know. So my wisdom is like, I don't expect you to be like, oh, I have a practice that you will not be able to mentally use to keep yourself stuck, because I'm very, very good at keeping myself stuck.
Your mind is a lot like mine was before awakening. I can relate.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a certain arrogance to the ego, right? That's like, oh, no matter what I do, I'll always overcome that with my thought, right? That's the ego does that. It has these tricks that like it plays on you, right? It's sneaky, sort of. One thing I was going to suggest is when you said, if I put myself in consciousness, or put my attention in, say, in the consciousness gate, I have a couple things to say about that. But one is when you say, I put attention in the consciousness gate, or into consciousness, into thought and consciousness, and it gets excruciating or painful or terrifying or something like that. I don't remember what word you used. Okay.
I mean, just to clarify, I mean like feeling the energy of the thought is really excruciating.
Okay.
And
so
it kind of blow out.
Okay. Well, let me just give you a couple suggestions then, because you're energetically, you're in a very, very good place. Like you're like ready to pop, because I can feel it. You're like done with this stuff, and at the same time you can't. So there's a great saying in Zen by a guy named Joshu, and he said, when you come to this place where you feel like you've swallowed a red hot iron ball, you can either spit out or swallow. That's where you're at. You're at that place, and to me, it's music to my ears. I do empathize with you, and I can feel what you're feeling. I know it's incredibly frustrating and confusing, and at the same time, you know you're going to push forward. You know it. You know you're not going to stop this one way or another. You couldn't if you wanted to, right? Yeah. So I empathize, and at the same time, it's music to my ears, because you're doing something, whether you know it or not, and how much of this is personal and your personal choice, I don't know, but you're doing something that very, very few people actually do. You're pushing yourself past in a completely irrational way. Like, this makes no sense. If you said what you just said to me to 99 people, they'd go, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you, just stop, go, you need to distract yourself, go, get a boyfriend or write something or exercise, right? But that's not what you want to do. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to push through this membrane, this barrier. Yeah. And you can do it. You will. I'm sure you will. I have no doubt about it. I've seen it so many times now. That part of my message I just want to give you is just give yourself permission to go through it at the deepest level that you can, beyond the mind, beyond the body, beyond any practice you've ever thought you understood or knew about or worked for you or didn't. Let go of all that. That is completely useless here. Here, that's useless. You don't need any memory of any practice or some teacher taught you this or that. Those teachers, those practices, anything I say, worthless, okay? Meaningless. Your instinct is what's going to push you through this. And your instinct meets a place where it's personal and radically impersonal. So really give yourself permission energetically at the deepest level. Just say, if this kills me to go through this, I'll go through it. If, practically speaking, you probably know it won't, and I know it won't, but energetically, it will feel like this could kill me. I don't know what's on the other side, but you know what? I'm done suffering. I can't make you do this, and I can't push you across that. I can only walk you to the edge. But I will tell you, when you have had this much suffering and you know that most of the suffering is up here. Like, it has to do with this identification. That. That's what makes awakening happen. Despair is the match that lights up enlightenment. You're in a very, very good place with this. The emotions and all that, fine. That's how, part of how this goes. And you're honoring them well. I can see it. You're giving space to the body mind. You're giving attention to all these energetic places in you, which is great. But there's a deeper level to this. There's a deeper instinct that's moving forward, not forward. It's moving into itself, but whatever. And you can trust that. You can really trust that at the level of mind, heart, and gut, and below that and beyond. Okay, it will take care of this. And when it comes, and this is going to come for you, you're going to be sitting at some point. I promise you, you're going to be sitting, and you're going to be like, maybe this is that place that he was talking about, or maybe you'll come to something that feels different than anything you've ever experienced, and yet it's very, very familiar. It's almost like, this is my chance to step over the edge. This is my opportunity to let go. This is my opportunity to jump. That's my advice. You can do it, and I'm quite sure you will. Actually, people don't get this far and turn around. People get a good ways and turn around, but not to this. When you're this far, what's the point? Like, what else are you going to do? You can go back to regular life. That ain't never going to happen, right? Ever, right? So you just got to go through it. You got to take that next step. And whether it's in consciousness, which I suspect it is, when you said it gets terrifying, it gets excruciating, I want to just tell you something about that. Remember, when you're in consciousness, when you're recognizing, oh, that's just another thought. This is going to kill me. I can't do this. That's another thought. The body might respond to it. The heart rate might go up, but this thought, this is excruciating. I can't go one more step. That is the voice of ego. That is the voice of the collective ego of humanity that's very old, very ancient, and it knows your triggers. It knows how to get your attention. It's like a life form. Eckhart Tolle calls it pain body. It's totally true. It's literally like a life form. It's smart. It knows how to get your attention. You just have to see through its tricks. You go, I'm going to stay here regardless. The mind says, I'm going to die if I stay in consciousness one more second. And the body's responding to it. The heart rate's up. I might be breathing. I might feel tension. But you know what? That's just a thought. What else you got? What else is here? Oh, I think I'm doing this wrong. That's another thought. Yeah, but so-and-so said that this is the practice. That's another thought. But what if I die doing this? That's another thought. Just stay with that pure consciousness. Discard thoughts, but stay with the consciousness. You don't have to push thoughts away. You don't have to struggle with them or wrestle with them or evaluate them. You just recognize, oh, that's just a thought. Just this, right? And it's neutral, actually. The body will have a strong response, and then it'll calm down, because the body can't stay in that state of agitation very long, I promise you. Physiologically, it can't. The mind can, but only if you believe the thoughts again and again and again, and grab like a monkey from one monkey bar to the next, or the next thought to the next thought. All the thoughts we're trying to do is get you to engage in thoughts. That's it. They'll be like, if you stay in this state, you will kill yourself. I'll make you put a gun to your head. You'll abandon your children. You'll abandon life. You'll become a bum under the bridge. I mean, the thoughts will say whatever they need to say. And the one that works, that's the one you're going to get next time. The one that pulls you out of consciousness, that makes you go, okay, this is too much. I'm going to go whatever. That's the one that comes back next time, right? Because it works. That's how our nervous systems work. They just do what works. So you could almost say, I've said this before, ego, or the sense of whatever barrier you're moving through, it kind of has two jobs. One is to protect itself. It wants to feel better. The ego wants to feel better too. Of course it does. But what it wants a little bit more than that is to survive. So, right, the ego will get behind spiritual practices. It'll get behind meditation and choir. It'll do all that. But you will come to this place, and this is how actually the whole talk started, and maybe this is why we had to talk about this. I don't know. But you'll come to this place where that is just exhausted. Not exhausted like it's tired, exhausted like it's done. It can't go farther, and you know that. And it's a very bizarre place to be. All of your orientations are dissolving. You're like, what the hell's going on? And yet I cannot do anything but move forward. Like, I feel like something's propelling me forward. And it is, actually. So then what you can do is recognize every single thought is only a thought in direct experience, just a thought. And you'll come to this neutral Don't even worry about, you could go, oh, this is consciousness. That's another thought too. Let it go. So you get to this neutral place that I'm calling consciousness, but you might not call it that. In fact, when there is just consciousness, there's no one calling anything anything. A label is a thought. It feels very neutral. It feels actually not interesting to the mind. So when you push past those terror thoughts, this is going to kill me, I'm going to go insane. That's another common one. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to go completely lunatic. I'm going to be a lunatic in an insane asylum if I stay in this much longer. But that is a thought, right? You go, oh, another thought. Then you'll get to this place where that'll calm down, and it's almost like it's equanimity, but it's contentless. It's like neutral, gray, something. It doesn't have content. And then the mind can calm down a little bit because the mind can't do anything with that. Okay? That neutrality, that's what's carrying you forward. That's what's knocking on your door. And it's going to knock harder and harder and harder until you open that door. So just open the door. Just stay with that neutrality. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Like if you go along with me moment to moment and you say, that's another thought, right? Just sit there and wait for the next thought. And it might be a doubt thought. Oh, I don't think I get this. Maybe I can never wake up. Oh, that's a thought. What's after? Then you just watch. The thought ends, and then what? Well, I do this sometimes, but then I always go back into thought. Oh, that's another thought.
I don't seem to have many like thoughts that I can hear. Like I think it's more like my experience is more like a constantly braced sensation.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay, here's the thing though. When you're doing this practice, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to explain. When you're doing this practice, that is a thought. This is very much right now, right here. I'm like showing you how to do it. Okay, so it's really important. If you want to take this step, there's other ways to do it, and sometimes it just happens by itself. But the way I'm talking, it's really important that first thought you believe is about you, that's a thought. Because if you can write that down, which you could write, what you just said, well, with me, things are different, et cetera, that's a thought you're identifying with. And in the practice itself, in this moment, if you want to do kind of where I'm pointing, and you can try this or not, that's what you recognize, oh, that's just a thought. Because that's what the ego does. It goes, well, with me, it's different, right? There's this thing called, Paul Hederman talks about terminal uniqueness. I'm different than everybody else. This is the ego's like signature. Like for me, it's way worse, right? So the thoughts that are going to come when you do this are going to be thoughts that tell you, oh, well, for me, it's different because I have, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, but that itself is a thought, right? Does that make sense? There's something that doesn't want to see that because it wants to defend itself. That's the ego structures. And it will feel like visceral, but the more you do it, the more you realize, oh, that's just another thought. That thought that seems like it's about me because I can make reference to the past, that's just a thought though, right? And then the next one that comes, and got it?
Maybe I'm getting tripped up on the definition of thought.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but can I add something that because I can totally relate to where you're at. And it's like the thing is the I that wants to do it can't do it. The I that wants to do this practice that he's talking about is not the I he's talking to. And it's interesting because when you were telling your story, you were smiling because you already know that. That's why you're smiling right now. So it's not, you want to try, believe me, because I was there and so long, I wanted to do it. But that's not the I. That's what Angela was saying. That's part of the ego. And so it's just more subtle layers. That's part of the party, that trying part, but that's not what he's talking. You can't do it. Like you as a separate individual can't do it. It's not a practice for that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Actually, that feels helpful.
I have something to add to.
Hit me.
That she just mentioned a braced sensation. That stood out to me when you said that, Gaia, because I remember and I still feel it sometimes. It's like sometimes you can't really see that it's a thought, but you just feel like this solidity in your body. and it's just that. Like it's like a fist clenched.
Yeah.
Like resistance, like the resistance to, like sometimes it's not clear that something's a thought and it just feels like no, like a resistance physically. I don't know, maybe I misunderstood, but that's what I heard when you just made that comment.
Yeah.
What Alma's saying, I totally agree with. That it does. I'm not disregarding the contraction, the physical experience of struggle. That is very much happening. But the key is recognizing that there's still interpretation when you say that's struggle, that's tension. Even that is a thought. Because without a thought labeling that tension, it actually dissolves at some point. It literally just dissolves into boundless clarity, right? Which sounds great to the ego, right? I want that to happen, but you don't really see that happening until you really de-identify and recognize the sense of you is the sense of the one that wants to label the experience and say, no, but it's really like this for me, right? That's the one that's trying to defend itself. You've got to go beyond, as Dan said, you go beyond the one that thinks it could do that practice. That this stuff we're talking about is slippery and it's tricky, but it definitely works. And as soon as you really are done with the suffering of thought, you'll just go beyond it, because you really have to realize and exhaust all the possibilities that you can think yourself into happiness. You can think yourself out of suffering, because you know you can't, but you're still kind of trying a little bit, or not you, but that's what we do. Right up until awakening, we still hold out some hope that I can figure this out. No, you can't figure it out. It's not figure outable. That's the whole thing. So there are many ways in, but the way I like to point is in this exact immediate experience right now. And I pointed many people this way, and many people have woken up. So it does work, but you have to do it. If you can't listen to me and evaluate whether what I'm saying makes sense to you or you want to try it, that doesn't work. It does work to apply it directly to your own experience though. So like later when you're sitting or whatever, you say, okay, Angela told me, what if I just literally challenge every thought that comes? And how do you know it's a thought? As soon as you can communicate it, it's a thought. As long as you can put it in words, it's a thought. If it's a label, it's a thought.
Okay.
I mean, it is. It has to be, right? What else could it be? If you can write it or say it to me, it's a thought. That's the litmus test. So if I'm sitting there and it's like, okay, thoughtless state, and there's a sensation in the body, let's say. Then the next thing is, ooh, tension in the body. This always happens. Okay, that's a thought. Catch it. Go. The term tension in the body is a thought. The term I'm going to die is a thought. The term terror is a thought. Those are all thoughts. I'm not disregarding what they point to. In fact, I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying what they point to actually does really matter, but those terms are used to prevent us from fully dying into the experience of what they are pointing to. The first step to really get under this tendency is consciousness. You have to wake up to that pure consciousness and know what that is experientially. When it happens to people, they often think or say, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't like I thought, and yet this has always been here. How could I have ever not seen this? I'm in it all the time. Every thought I ever had was in this consciousness and part of the consciousness, and yet I was thinking I was that thought. I was thinking I was the one trying to navigate the consciousness or find consciousness, right? It's not like that. It's just this oceanic being, peace, flow, however, okay? And the way you recognize that is first see the neutrality of it. It feels very neutral at first, it does, but it doesn't last that long when you see, okay, that's another thought. And the mind will get, let's use the term, restless. The mind gets a little restless, and when you're sensitive, you can feel this energetically happening. You'll see the consciousness, it starts to go, and it wants to make a thought, right? When there's nothing, okay, but I always get to this place and then blah, 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 blah. That's your thoughts talking, but you feel like it's you. The trick of the ego is to convince you that your voice is the ego's voice. That's its trick. And so the moment we identify with one single thought, we're in a polarity in consciousness. We're not experiencing actual consciousness. But because the power of pure consciousness, pure being, it's very powerful actually, because it has a lot of pull and a lot of power. We only have to slow down that thought process for a reasonably short time before it explodes into your experience. That's called awakening. And it always happens. If somebody is willing to stop thinking. And the way you stop thinking is you recognize every thought as a thought, and you just keep watching that inside of you, which is aware of the thoughts, right? Like right now, is there something in there that's aware of all the thoughts or the sounds or sensations? Like, is there a sense of something that's like the lights are on and that's what makes it possible to hear me? You don't have to think about it, right? It's already there. It's the one that searches for the thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's it. That's it. Don't add anything to that. Don't add anything to that. Just notice that you are always in that, or that's always just the case, yes? And then from that, you just kind of go, okay, what's the next thought? And you're literally looking. It's like innocent curiosity. This isn't complex. Excellent. Good, good. Just look. Just look for the next thought. Like, you can't wait to see it, right? Why can't I not wait to see the next thought? Because I'm going to de-identify with it. I'm going to recognize it's a thought. Do you feel that? Do you understand what I'm like trying to purvey, at least as far as the practice? Stay in that sense of just me, the light of consciousness right now that makes experience possible. The thing that if it turned off, you wouldn't be here with us. And because it's on, you can see, hear, smell, taste, and think. That, look from that. From that neutral space of whatever that doesn't need a name, label. It's always been there your whole life. It's been in there for every single thought. It's been there before the thought. It's been there after the thought. So you just look from that and you watch the thought as it forms. And you go, what's the next thought going to be? You literally look for it. Like, I'm waiting. And then just quiet. And the second a thought forms, oh, I got to, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's a thought. Back there, looking again. It's like, it's flowing, it moves, it has sort of an experience to it, but it's no labels, no thoughts, no interpretations. That's where the money is. And you're almost excited for the next thought because you're going to immediately disarm it. Thoughts have held you hostage for way too fucking long. This is your way to investigate something else. Let that something else show you what it is by just staying in it. It'll show you its nature. It'll reveal itself over time. But for now, it's neutral. And neutrality is not too bad, is it? This kind of neutrality, this pure consciousness, it's not too bad, right? It's not a problem. There are no problems here. Just trust that, okay? Do you get me? Do you get what I'm saying? Can you apply this when you go sit?
When I, like, just applying it with you now, like, thought came up, but then I was like, that's a thought, but then I sort of, something in me like hooks into it.
That's another thought. Yeah, that's another thought.
And then I'm like, okay, I'm hooked into it and I don't want to be. That's a thought.
Yes.
Okay.
That's it. There's nothing to figure out. Like, that's the weird thing about this. There's nothing to solve. That's the beauty of it too. There's nothing to solve, right?
Okay.
The mind is a hammer and it always wants a nail. It's always looking for a problem to solve. And that solving, that a constant activity of solving makes you find nails all the time. You just put down the hammer. Can you feel that? This does work, I promise. Okay. And when you go sit and the thought comes and says, well, this won't work for me, that's another thought. Okay?
Yes.
You know, it's something, I'm always a little cautious with this because there's something very taboo, actually, in like social norms. There's something very taboo about calling out thoughts. Like, if I were to talk like this to somebody who wasn't where you are right now, they'd be like really offended. What are you telling me what to think and stuff? Because the ego just really defends its right to have center stage all the time. and it wants your attention, and it will defend anyone else from taking that attention away. It'll defend from you, from itself. It just has these defense mechanisms. There's like a taboo thing about talking about thoughts, which is interesting, but the truth of it is we all have all these random stupid thoughts, and you know what? We all have the same thoughts. They're completely stereotyped. So the step you want to take, the step I can feel you wanting to take, is right here. You move beyond the thoughts, and the way you do that is you don't think about moving beyond the thoughts. You realize that's another thought. And that neutrality, that's where the money is. It's not a big deal. And when you compare it to all these like wild spiritual practices, it feels like that can't be it. Well, that's another thought, right? I want to hear from you again. Make sure you message me, and I'll talk to you anytime. Okay.
Okay.
You're in a very good place. Trust your deepest.
I feel excited. I'm like, I want to go meditate.
Ishwar, do you have anything to add to her? This is my friend Ishwar.
Where's Ishwar?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
That is the first and last step. So that's a good place to be. From the things that you've said, your feelings and emotions, coupled with your ideas and concepts that you have, are a very powerful tool and recipe to be present and aware of what's happening, because you're already aware of what's going on within you. So being aware of what you're describing, what's happening, is a blessing in itself. So it's a good place to start, and it'll take you a very, very long way. Suffering is the place where suffering is going to end. Is where it begins, is where it's going to end. So if you're at that point where you're feeling all kinds of stuff, well, you're home. You know, letting go isn't something you actively have to do. Letting go is a byproduct of just seeing what's happening, and then naturally you'll let go of it. You know, it doesn't require effort from you to really let go of something. Seeing correctly and seeing accurately, letting go is a natural byproduct. You'll stop holding on to things that don't serve you. You know, and that really doesn't require any effort on your end, but just seeing what's happening. So I think that's cool.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions?
Can I add something?
Hit it.
So where she said, like, I really relate when she said, well, then I recognize that's a thought, but then something else comes and I feel a little attached to that one. And that was really present for me for a long time. I felt like there was something attached to thoughts that were saying that's a thought, and choosing thoughts and which thoughts are me. And it was really confusing until I just became really resilient with it, like remind myself, like with like so much grit, that literally everything that is with words is a thought. And it was really challenging, but I literally had to do that all the time, like washing the dishes, having a shower, every time. And I still actively do that when things come up. It's like, nope, that's another thought, that's another perspective. And just reminding myself constantly. For me, I would do that. I would get attached to one, but then then throw out the other. And it was just madhouse. You know, it wasn't really doing anything until I realized every single one of them is a thought, is a perspective, and I'm not any of them. So, and then it kind of like dissolves from like being sticky to the thought anymore, and like from being like, I am the thought. And then you're just not a thought anymore. You don't really let go. It just kind of dissolves into itself. And yeah, but it feels like what you said. And I don't know, for me, it was just, I had to be really resilient with it. And it was like, because it was so easy for me to go unconscious. That's what I noticed. Like if I'm identifying with a thought, I'm unconscious, and like that, like I just became like so sad when I would be unconscious that I would be like, oh God, I don't want to be unconscious. So how do I fix it in a way? And the only way actively I could do was to say, oh, every single thing is a thought, and really noticing what that is. So.
You know, Ramana Maharishi, there's a quote somewhere, and you know, the quote is somewhere off the internet, so he may not have said this, someone may have made it up, but I think he actually said it. He said, the self is a thought and the world is a thought. And that's really important to recognize. It sounds so radical, And yet it's totally true, right? Whatever's here right now, you know, sounds and shapes and colors and lines and images, sensations, without any of those labels, that's what's here. There's not a world, there's not a body. You know, sounds crazy, but it's also in direct experience, it's obvious.
Angela, it's funny, you just said something. What I was going to ask a minute ago is, I feel like I won't give up some of the last remaining thoughts, because then I have to give up the whole world. Like literally, then there's not a world, there's not a plot line, there's not a tomorrow, there's not a location, like everything starts going.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of fun if I'm meditating. But if I'm like walking around, it's like something in me finds that really unnerving or like sad or something. It's like walking out of the Harry Potter movie. You're like, it's over. And what's happened lately is like the world sucks. Like the worlds I create suck even when they're going well. Like they're so fucking uncomfortable all the time that it's actually motivating me more to like, I'm more willing than I was even like 2 months ago to give up those last remaining thoughts like throughout the day or whatever, because there's something like gnarly. Like there's just this like static in having a world. Like it's really uncomfortable.
That's right. So the world what we think is going to happen when we let go of that world, and what really happens when we let go of the world are radically different. Is something being let go of? Sure, but it's kind of like you've been in a little tiny box with VR goggles on your whole life, and you break out of the box and take off the VR goggles. Yeah, you have to let go of that world. Yeah, you have to let go of the box world. I mean, but if that's all you've ever known, it's scary. If it feels like that was real, and someone's like, here's a hole. I broke a hole in the side of your box world. Come on out. Come out. Oh, no, I'm not coming out there. Are you crazy? No, this is my world, man. You know, and so that's normal. Our nervous systems operate that way. We like what's comfortable. We like what's familiar. It makes sense, right? Continuity and familiarity are kind of the big barriers to awakening in a lot of ways. There's something that you're not sure you want to let go of, and you can never really know that you actually did want to let go of them until you did. Once you realize what it means to live as the mystery, total mystery, it's like, wow. Until you really experience it, though, there's always part of you that's going to go, well, what do you mean I have to get rid of it, give up everything, you know, in a sense? Like, what do you mean I can not know anything about this? Like, I don't know if I want to go to a place where I can't know anything. Sure, from the standpoint of the one that thinks it creates and navigates a world by knowing, that's terrifying. And yet, again, a lot of this comes down to grace. A lot of this comes down to trust in life, you know, these things that sound like they could be stereotyped, but they're not. It's true. You have a profound trust and love for life when the mystery of everything is revealed naturally. It's so beautiful. And yet, there's no way to know that without letting go. So, you know, a lot of this is instinct. All right, well, I think maybe we'll wrap up. Thanks everybody for coming. Sophie, thanks for coming.
Bye, Sophie.
Bye, Sophie. All right, everybody. I really appreciate all of your input and your participation. Hey, do me a favor. Oh, I'm glad I remembered. So just so we can do these in the future and it's easy for me to remember who to invite, will you guys send me an email if you want to be on the list for when we're going to do them? Just send an email to me and I'll put you on a list and I'll do it all through email. Okay, that's the best way I can think of. My email address is Angelo. It's pretty easy. It's angelo.gassman, Gasman, @gmail.com. So send me an email and say, yes, I want to be on that. And then I'll just make a list of people that I invite when we do Skype sessions. And we'll do them a couple times a month, maybe. I love seeing all your faces. It's fun. Nice to see you guys.
Thanks, Angelo.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.